76. All right, cool. I'm going to read a bit from my second novel, which we're all here to celebrate, called Muscleman. And it takes place, it's like the narrator, or the protagonist Harold, has been waiting for a departmental meeting to begin, and the people are just coming into the room. The law's halls led incoherent bursts of marching students past their meeting room, which was not really a room but a crevice. A group of football players who chided each other in boisterously thick and brassy tones ambled past. Harold strained to hear their voices. Harold imagined bigger versions of the kids he had grown up with: Chris, Duff, Jeff, Jalen. As a child, Harold had excelled at sports. He excelled at physical activity in general, particularly Taekwondo, for which, when he was 9, Harold placed second in the national competition for Poomsae form and third for sparring, but football didn't interest him. Even then, he felt that it was too brutally team-oriented. Recently, however, Harold had begun to acquire an appreciation for it. Many things that had formerly seemed arbitrary became meaningful after Harold had started lifting weights. Despite all his mistakes that had caused him to drift further and further away from football, despite the way he had lived his life until he started lifting weights, he was grateful that he could now engage with football in some way, by watching it or teaching the occasional player in class. Out in the hall, one of the players yelled, then many laughed, and for a moment there seemed to be a pocket of genuine consensus in the building. Harold recalled a joke Casey had told him. What is the only thing two academics can agree on? How bad a third academic's work is. The boisterous voices made Harold yearn for the gym. He wanted nothing more than to grip a barbell between his fingers and press up, to hear the clanging of weights punctuated by the grunts of men, the brassy voices in the hall transformed into sounds of steel, clinking, crashing. He wanted to leave, to get up and go now, but he still had a whole meeting to get through. Suddenly, the door opened and a few students came in, muscled, fervent, loud, square jaws, open flannels with shirts or tank tops underneath, short shorts, backpacks. Vance and Dolly sneered at them. Harold imagined Vance and Dolly as literal buzzards, flying around the room trying to peck the football players' eyes. Professors and graduate students often complained that the college exploited them. It paid them for very little for what amounted to a lot of work, but the college exploited football players most of all. The football team drew enormous crowds and brought in enormous sums of money, in addition to boosting morale. The players often practiced twice a day. They had to eat a certain way and study plays in addition to schoolwork. During games, they faced immense pressure to win, and on top of it all, they had to go to class and deal with the scornful abuse of their professors, which was perhaps the saddest aspect of their plight. Literature professors hated football players because football players worked harder than literature professors and were smarter than literature professors. Football players engaged in an activity with stakes. Literature, on the other hand, was the domain of flounderers and bunglers, who, in the renowned Shepherd College, sought nothing more than protection from the consequences of their bungling. Literature was stale and obsolete, corrupted by a kind of bunglemania. The professors hated the football players because they did not understand the football players, whereas the football players hated the professors because they understood them all too well. Harold had puzzled over this for years, observing with increasing interest that the enmity between the two groups seemed to grow exponentially, at least on the side of the professors. They were always complaining about how much funding was being allocated to sports-related things, whereas their department's funding was frequently getting stripped. And concluded that the thing that made the football players so resilient to the machinations of professors was none other than their love of football. The football players fought back against the deadening more than any other student group on campus, essentially because they loved football. This love structured their lives so that they regularly failed to do their homework, and this was in the end what saved them. The intruding students, upon seeing that they'd wandered into the wrong room, turned and left without saying a word. Hey, Harold wanted to yell, wait up. approached him with his hand outstretched. "Harold," David said. He gestured toward the empty chair next to Harold, against which the backpack was leaning.
So how did you come to write this book, and why did it feel important to sort of capture all aspects of this lonely man, Harold?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's always really tempting to lie about questions like this. You know, people are like, "Well, how did you come up with this book?" And then it's like really easy to sort of like give this big-brained answer that I like thought of after the fact. And the reality is that like I think it's sort of emerged from one, writing rants in my phone about like how much I hated school and how much I hated professors and why I was so right about everything. And then at the same time, sort of like really kind of becoming interested in Gothic novels and sort of that mode, you know what I mean? Like kind of, so I wrote the beginning of like a Gothic story that became, I think, the beginning of this book. But part of it was that like there was a period of time where the mood, I think, like in culture and on campuses and in the literary world was this one of like horrifying claustrophobia. And for me, like I would hear people lying and being I saw a thing on Twitter the other day, it was linked to a New York Times article, and it said that like 88% of students in undergrad say that they have lied about holding more progressive views than they have. And so like that sort of situation where, everybody's lying, everybody feels pressured to lie, I couldn't really find a way to kind of like navigate my own kind of like response, you know what I mean? Like it was, and so I think I like sort of threw up a bunch of stuff into like a document or many documents, and then like pieced it all together in a novel.
I don't know, I find that honesty very refreshing, because like someone asked me recently like, "Oh, did you like write a book because of like this great love you have for this topic?" And I was like, no, I was like really annoyed, so it all just sort of came gushing out. I think more of us should be honest about how and why we vomit up things onto documents that are then assembled. So this is your second novel. I'm not going to presume that it is the second one, that you wrote this after the first one or whatever. If that is the case, you can perhaps tell us. But how is writing this book different than from writing the first one?
In some ways it was similar. I mean, like in some ways it was similar, which was like I said, it started with this kind of self-righteous rant mode. And then when I came back to it, I was like, this is so ugly and so full of cope and so just like ridiculous. And like Rene Girard talks about, I mean, I talk about this all the time, but he talks about the idea of a novelistic conversion, which is that the author sort of encounters themselves in the first draft and sees that it's basically a put-up job. That basically you're attempting to scapegoat someone or something, and and that an author needs to be able to move through, needs to describe the evil of the other from within. And so for me, what that looked like was being like, I really thought that I was like going to write this book that was like a straightforward defense of like strength and like vitality, whatever. And it just didn't turn out to be the case at all. And so in that way, it was similar to the first novel, which I had a very similar experience with. But it was different insofar as I think this was like, purely fictional. Like I've never been an academic. I was consciously trying to engage in like, the Gothic mode, and just drawing from different sources.
Yeah. What appealed to you about the Gothic?
I think a couple of things. I mean, a couple of things. One is the way that like you can explore themes that are sort of somehow like historical and psychological and spiritual all at once, in a way where like it's not always clear. There's like a leakiness between the psychology and the environment. You can get at certain themes in ways that I think are more true than if you just try and like say an idea. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Or you just try and like give some sort of dogmatic account of like, here's what I think. You can really kind of explore the kind of deeper layers of sociological things, philosophical. You can explore all that. And I'm also really interested in the way that in certain like in Henry James Turn of the Screw, right? There's a way that like it's a very psychological novel, but the form of the sentences, it sort of, you can like, there's like a phenomenological quality to the sentences. It like comes alive and makes you feel like you're inhabiting the consciousness of the protagonist. And so I was trying to do that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you totally nailed that. I mean, as you were just saying that, I I wasn't going to phenomenology, but I was thinking like, yeah, there's something like deeply irrational in those sentences, and I feel like that's like such a key aspect of the Gothic, right? Like, that's why it's so good for writing about paranoid people.
Totally. And also just like, you know, the total kind of like, I think I think like the mood in general is like highly irrational, like in culture, and it's like highly irrational, and like, you know, there's this kind of like violence that seeps beneath everything, and people just pretend, you know, that you can like rationally kind of work certain things, you know, you can kind of like perfect the person and whatever. I don't know. Anyway, the Gothic I think is a great myth.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a fairly straightforward realist treatment of this material that is like available, right? But the Gothic lets you not only capture the sort of content of a paranoid mind, but like the atmosphere of a paranoid mind, and like the paranoia of a literature professor who is like obsessed with strength, and who all he seems to want is to like be like no thoughts, just like get huge, just like lift his way out of thinking. And yet, as someone who parses language and symbol and meaning, he's like totally unable to escape meaning, and like this becomes somehow his like tragic flaw, some sort of like tragic irony is that all he wants is to lift and get huge, and he just like keeps thinking about words and the tiny violences of his colleagues, their pettiness. I'm curious about this theme of strength, and I guess like why strength? That's somewhat of a pat question, but like why strength? And you mentioned thinking that you went into the book thinking that you would have one sort of approach or message on strength, and you seem to have found yourself surprised, or that your goal, what you wanted to say about strength, changed in the drafting, and I'm curious like, what changed for you about strength?
It's a good question. I mean, I think part of it was that, you know, when I was kind of, I'm trying to think of how to put it. There was a period of time, especially maybe from 2017 to 2021, where like I became really sort of horrified and disillusioned with a lot of the kind of like ideological cultural currents that were going, you know. And for me, I was being very epistemically open at the time, right? I'm like, you know, maybe it is the case that, you know, all of this kind of resentment and envy and stuff is like born of weakness. And like maybe strength is, you know, like I'm like considering this, you know what I mean? Like maybe Nietzsche was, maybe, you know, but like, you know, it's a cliche, right? It's totally cliche, but I'm like, you know, I'm like taking this kind of serious, and I'm like, well, maybe this is the, you know, and I don't think that's true, you know what I mean? You know, I'm like, yeah, maybe, you know, I'm trying to, you know, it's like maybe, you know, there are like forces and people out there that do hate beauty and you know, want to destroy everything and tear down the competent, and you know, and like, you know, but the thing is that whenever I was worked up about that the most, it was like almost always a response to some sort of situation where I was personally impotent in my life, right? Where I'm like blaming other people. You know, suddenly when I start blaming other people, I'm like, it's always a response to some sort of failing of my own, is what I basically think. You know? And so like, in the I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, and so it's a little bit hard to talk about, but basically it became a kind of ultimately a satire of the protagonist.
Yeah. I mean, I found that the ending of the book, which we won't sort of give away, I found it like really heartbreaking and really depressing, but also I'm like, oh yeah, it do be like that for guys like that. Like it do, it do be. And so I'm not gonna leave this theme of strength alone, because I find it so fascinating, because it becomes a bit of it kind of becomes the language that Harold has to sort of formulate his own kind of like spiritual quest or spiritual journey. And so like you have this guy who formally sort of built his life around literature and around art and beauty, who sort of, for whom like that was his religion. He seems to have like had a real, I don't know, like crisis of faith with respect to that, and he sort of stumbles into the church of the gym. Could you talk a bit about, I guess, like modern spirituality and like the different forms of spiritual quest takes, and sort of making a spiritual quest the heart of a novel in 2024, 2025, because that is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the compliment about my question.
Yeah. No problem. I mean, I think, well, for me at least, I'll talk from experience. When I was younger, I basically grew up online. You know what I mean? I was obsessed with literature. I grew up online, and I lived like a fundamentally disincarnate life. You know, I'm like, if I just change my thoughts, then everything will be better. If I just change my mood, everything will be better. You know, if I just get the right kind of like, if I read the right literature and have the fun talk, you know, whatever, right? But like, I basically ignored my body, and then when I started, and this is not an uncommon experience, but it's like when I started exercising, suddenly my depression like went away, and my anxiety went away, and like all this is like, it's incredibly powerful, right? And then you start to think like, you know, well, maybe this is the answer. You know, maybe this is the end. But I think that kind of like, you know, spiritualizing, there's a huge risk in sort of spiritualizing strength or spiritualizing the body, you know what I mean? And I understand it as a reaction to the kind of like disincarnate mode where we're like online and we're gonna like upload ourselves to the cloud, you know, all that stuff. But basically, I think it's not a replace. I think there are like paradoxes in strength. You know, I'm a Christian, and so I think like there's, you know, strength in forgiveness and strength in mercy, you know, stuff like that. And which I think that you know, like a kind of like cult of the body, sort of like pagan gym temple zone misses completely.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I was struck by how Saint Ignatius Loyola, the vibes coming out of Harold and his quest to get huge and get swole, but also what getting huge, I don't know, like the reasons and motivations like a person gets huge, and like how those understandings of those motivations change over time. Because despite Harold's like quest for the ultimate pump, I mean, there's my favorite parts of this book are like Harold describing his ideal pump, or like his ideal like gym session, or like his ideal glute arrangement on a man. Like, it's just so good. I was talking.
That would be your favorite.
Honestly, it's so real. I was talking to a friend about this book earlier, and I said, yeah, the book is so good, like weirdly gay. And he said, so gay, so much good stuff about men's asses.
I asked a journalist. There was a journalist from the Free Press who wrote on me, and he was a gay guy. And I was like, is this book gay? Because like all the biggest supporters of the book so far are gay guys.
Well,
is it gay? And here's a question that I have for you. Is this a gay?
Oh my God, it might be the gayest novel. I'm so glad you brought this up. Like, and I have a book coming out this year. This book is gayer than my book. I think gay men, I think, are gonna love this book because gay men often feel the way that Harold feels, right? Where they've had this one kind of life devoted to beauty or loving a world that doesn't love them back, and now they're trying to not get back at that world, but to sort of acquire the tools of their oppressors. And so gay men do be in the gym, getting huge, taking steroids, arguing about who is or is not taking steroids. They're on the meme accounts. Like, this is their world. And I think you have perhaps written the first novel for gay gym guys.
You've heard it here first.
This is like,
no matter what they say about me, remember I'm a friend.
No, I mean, truly. I mean, but also, I think one of the other aspects of this book that feel like really, really gay to me, or you could just say like profoundly human, is like, it is such a rich book about friendship and loneliness, and like what it is to try to connect to other people, or to recognize that you do want to connect to other people, and to find yourself totally lacking the tools to make friends. And I will say that I myself, like, I'm a novelist, words are my stock in trade, feelings are my stock in trade, and there are some times when I am so riven by loneliness that I like don't even have words to express it. And like reading this book, I was like, Harold gets it. Like, Harold knows what it is to like have a very charismatic man in your life that you just like wanna connect with and like be with, but also maybe sleep with, but like just like be intimate with, because they get you so much and you don't know how to communicate that to them. And I feel like this book is such a rich articulation of that experience.
Awesome.
Yeah. I wanted to put that in the blurb, but it was too long. But yes, this is great. the gay book of 2025, but also I want to talk about form. So, you know, like you're known for being a bit of a Bernhardian.
Dude, it's such a shame. There was I think it was man, I can't remember who it was, but I didn't even know that was like a cliche. And then I was reading after I wrote The Novelist, and I think it was Sabal. Someone said that like you should never ever say that you're influenced by Bernhard, because then you're immediately put in a Bernhard box and they never let you out.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time, and I wish I never did. But in fairness, well, whatever, never mind. Yeah. In the Novelist, I kind of ironize it. You know, it's sort of. I'm not like the other ones. You know what I mean?
I mean, what I will also say is that gays love Bernhard. They do. It is like.
You don't have to keep talking about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a kind of catty mode. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's like gossipy. It's mean.
Yeah,
it's like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like unabashedly eloquent, but like stabbing somebody in like it's like gossip, right? I mean, like that's the thing about Bernhard, and it's a thing that Sapolda inherits from him, is that it is a sort of inherently gossipy mode. It's like two dudes talking, except in Bernhard it's like him talking to himself. But I was gonna say that like what strikes me as like very different about this book and some other Bernhardian books is I feel like they take the Bernhardian to like a very literal place, whereas in this book, I mean, he isn't just like stuck in one place, right? Like he isn't just like stuck in one place and with his mind wandering everywhere. He goes to different places. He goes to different avenues, and to me it felt like when he like, you know, like when the staff meeting happens, I was like, I can't believe Jordan like actually let the staff meeting happen. This is a Bernhardian book. What's the thing isn't allowed to happen.
You got to give the people what they want. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, but like so much of the Bernhardian mode is edging, like sort of infinitely forestalling it, right? And I feel like this book is peopled with so many events. But that being said, you do love to linger. It's a book that lingers, a book that dawdles. And so could you talk a bit about the discursive and the tension between like the stasis that lets you go deep down the rabbit hole and like the sort of inherent, maybe the inherent need for motion in a novel with a plot?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so speaking of Bernhard, Bernhard has this great line where he says, invisible processes which nobody sees are the only interesting thing about literature at all. And one of the things that I sometimes think about, I mean, I thought about, so when I was young, I like wrote poetry, and it was all very kind of unconscious, you know what I mean? But once I became a little older, I became a little bit more conscious of like, it was a little bit paralyzing, like, well, what am I doing? Like, what is a book? Why am I writing, you know? And at first I was like, well, a book is just words on the page. You know, it's the actual words on a page. And so that's what literature uniquely is. And so I got really into like Gordon Lish and this kind of, you know, it's like, well, the way the words look and the way that they sound, right? This is uniquely literature. But then I was like, well, there's novels that I love, like, you know, that are in translation, where the sentences are ugly, like maybe Dostoevsky. So you can't just, you know, well, no, I love, no, but you know what I'm saying, like, you're right, okay. It's not, you know, I don't mean that at all as a, whatever.
I'm telling.
Yeah. Good plot. And so I'm like, you know, anyway, I was eventually like, you know, well, movies do action very well, you know, and music does emotion really well, and, you know, painting does image really well. But what novels can do uniquely well is to portray a particular texture of consciousness.
Yeah.
And so like that's what I like in novels, you know what I mean? And so I just and also I like to, you know, drink a lot of caffeine and freak out in front of the computer. And so that but you're right, so there's a tension there because often anyway, there's a need for it to hit, right? Like I want my novels to propel the reader forward. I want it to be like a fun and engrossing experience. And so there are like just things you can do on the language level. There's like little kind of devices you can do and stuff. But all of that to say, my third novel is going to be like a major motion picture novel. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Well, I'm excited about the major motion picture novel, but also I think you do it so well. I think what I found really amazing is that you capture, I mean, often when people think like, oh, I'm gonna like really capture a texture of consciousness, and that often looks one of two ways. It either looks like this like pointillistic, fragmentary, glittering spectacle, which or it can often be incredibly like boring, like very laborious and very slow. And I feel like you've somehow managed to capture the energy of a mind that's been a little addled by like caffeine and the internet. Like his mind does flip from place to place and these like associative flights of fancy, and yet there's this great feeling of like spiraling down, going down the rabbit hole, which feels kind of true to modern consciousness. And so I think you found a way to like really marry those two, and so much of the propulsion of the novel is watching this man have a slowly developing panic attack because of like ever minute observations that he is making about the people around him, and like it's like kind of driving him insane.
Well, dude, I mean, that's also just my experience. Like you're like in a meeting with someone, and they like, you know what I'm saying? They do they like with their lips, or there's other kinds of details, or. Let's see. Anyway, what's good?
We just experienced it right here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember.
No, it's totally fine. So we've talked about form, we've talked about the spiral, the rabbit hole consciousness. I want to ask about setting and location. So like, did you always know that we would sort of begin in one of his temples, the sort of fallen temple of academia, and that we would then sort of traverse to the gym? Did you always know that there would be like gym sections in the book?
I can't remember. I don't know. I can't remember. I mean, I just can't remember. I don't know if I always knew it. I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's true. Like the way that I write is like a lot of just a lot at once, and then editing for like many years. And so I truthfully, it's not like I sit down and I'm like, I'm gonna write a novel about these themes, and like it's gonna do this. Like it's just a mess, and then I shape it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Like, I don't know. Well, actually, I will say when I got into lifting, I started reading a lot of bodybuilder memoirs and other things about lifting, and they always felt totally fake to me because they were just like full of cliche. They were full of like this kind of like this way of talking that just didn't feel accurate to me. And so I thought, like, what if you could write a kind of like phenomenologically accurate, kind of like slowed down, like lifting thing, like let's pay attention to like what actually, and also in like a defamiliarized kind of way, like what, if I'm not just using like prepackaged lifter sort of cliches, like what actually does it feel like is happening?
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, that reminds me of, I've been reading all of David Foster Wallace's essays on tennis, and there's this really mean review he writes of Tracy Austin's memoir, and in it he is like so heartbroken because Tracy Austin is like, of course, like one of the great tennis geniuses. She's like one of the first like tennis prodigies we like understand it in America. And he reads this memoir, David Foster Wallace, and he's like, wow, all these cliches are so horrible. How can someone be so like transcendently gifted and also like deeply stupid? Like, is this the ghostwriter, or is she just like that dumb? Does she have no insight into her own consciousness or life? Or maybe she doesn't have an inner life. How is it possible that a great genius wouldn't have an inner life? And I feel somehow that like this book is so smart on the topic of like what goes on in the mind, or like doesn't go on in the mind when a person is like lifting. And it ascribes to that activity, I think, like a, not grace, but a kind of deep attention that I think many people just like don't imagine possible for that. Because I think for many people, they're like, oh, they're just like jocks getting huge. And like, I feel like this book somehow finds the poetry in the heart of the jock.
Thanks. I mean, well, one of the things that actually is weird is like when you read like bodybuilding, I mean, like Mike Menster, for example, is a famous bodybuilder, and you read his books, and he was so obsessed with Ayn Rand that he thought that his whole physique, the way he posed, everything was oriented toward promoting Ayn Rand's philosophy. And so like he wasn't, and you read these other, and actually they have totally developed, if very, eccentric views about what they're doing means, you know what I mean? But still, none of it is just a kind of like attentional, okay, what would this feel like if I get rid of the concepts, which is always kind of what I'm trying to do with writing, which is like, if I can get rid of the cliche, if I can get rid of the sort of concepts, the kind of things that kind of numb my vision, this habitual way of perception, then what actually is going on, or how can I describe it in a way that's kind of, differentiated, and
So. I mean, I think like that is like the the task of great art, and I wish like more writers felt that way, that like just like clearing out the debris and the rubble and trying to find a way to encounter the thing on its own terms and first principle, right?
Yeah, I did like the there's the bit in the book. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger is kind of good. He says that in Pumping Iron, he says that the pump feels like coming, and it's at least an attempt, you know. But in the novel, I say that actually he had it backwards, you know, that the hip thrusts and like having to hold yourself up and whatever. That's the actual good feeling that comes from that. But still, like, anyway, I was anyway, I don't know what I'm just talking now. I'm trying to sell books here, guys. Was that funny? You guys want to buy? Yeah,
I thought it was really funny. I mean,
yeah, thanks.
I will say that part goes on for quite a while.
It goes on for a while. People like. I actually have a friend who has a book coming out with FSG who just did media training, and she told me, they said, don't talk about sex. You know, their media training was like, don't talk about sex and don't talk about Israel. And I'm not going to talk about Israel, but like, but you know, one thing I've noticed, like on the board of the DiTrapano Foundation, we get all these submissions, and like almost all of them start with something about sex in a really kind of crude way. Anyway, so I'm trying to. Anyway, maybe you guys like that. That's part of the book, you know.
I don't think you're supposed to tell them that you're doing it. But but like the people are into it.
Yeah.
The gays anyway. I think it's time for questions. So if you raise your hand and project, we can get you all in. Yes.
Oh, great, brilliant. I'm so looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
It sounds wonderful. And I just recently read the memoir of Physical Education that came out this year, which is a memoir about lifting. It's very good. But in it, the author says that we divide lifting into like this vain, stupid people do it, and running is this virtuous, smart people do it thing. And I wonder if your character or the idea of like physicality with this person, if you'd ever explored other sports for them, if they didn't quite work for some reason.
I definitely didn't explore other stuff, but I will say to that thing about where people are like, you know, lifting is vain and egotistical. I actually do think that it's sort of the opposite, which is that a lot of I think academics, I think people there's something humbling always in the act of lifting because you have to learn it. You often, you know, people train to failure, so your like goal is to sort of fail, which is kind of a weird thing. And so I do actually think that it can breed a kind of humility. I mean, of course, there's a vanity involved, or there can be, you know. But I think that a lot of the time that's cope from weak people. I really do. They're like, oh, everyone's vain. They're all sort of just in it. I think that's just not true as a rule.
It's your party. It's your party.
I don't want to have to.
Sam.
Do you think we're in a Bernhardian moment? There's been a few books at the moment that really.
Look, I think we're in Jordan Castro mode.
Yeah.
I think, no, I don't know. I do think that it's a mode. I think there are probably a number of reasons why that's a popular mode. I don't really want to speculate.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems as if we are. I mean, there's a lot of novels that are doing that thing.
Do you think there's a connection between that and the internet, or moving away from the internet novel, but still having to contend with it?
Yeah, I mean, insofar as people's like daily experience often is just looking at the internet and talking shit about their friends in their head or something like that, I think that's totally, you know, it's kind of like autofiction by other means or something like that. And but I don't know. I mean, it's a form that clearly gives expression to a kind of like impotent, pent up anger. Everybody has to sort of be nice. You know what I mean? There's like this kind of fake niceness, the etiquette of like all these different zones in the lit world, academia. You know, the kind of key thing is to like be nice and to like fake it, you know. And so I think there's this kind of like, yeah, it's like a kind of like resentment kind of building that people give voice to in the Bernhardian kind of mode. That might be it. I don't really know. It's also just like it is. I mean, you read him. He's one of these writers. You just read him and you want to copy him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what else to say about it. Like people, it might just actually be that people are finding out they're reading him for the first time, and then his style possesses them because it's so good and hilarious. I mean, it might just be that simple, you know.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking tonight. It's been so lovely and charming. I've been trying to write satire for a while. I write satire about leftist organizing spaces, and that's been very fun. I
Mm,
will say that
easy,
it's risky. It's a risky satire. But the criticism I get a lot from like my readers and my friends is just that it makes them feel really nihilistic and sad about their lives, which is not really what I'm going for.
Are
And
these
I
like the
guess-
leftist organizer friends?
Yeah, of course it is. So I guess my question is how you balance like between satire and meaning and like earnestness.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I really like the essay, The Epic and the Novel by Mikhail Bakhtin, and he sort of says that like the novel emerges basically, it's basically emerges from what he calls a serio-comical genre, that like the epic is sort of like, or poems, there's the speaker speaking to the audience one-to-one, But in a novel, it's always this kind of like ironic relationship. So there's always, he basically thinks that like even like Don Quixote, is it basically like a satire of the sort of heroic thing, whatever. And so like, I think it's sort of inherent to the form, actually. But that being said, I think that, you can't, for me at least, and this is part of the thing that I talked about before, which is like sometimes the urge to like write a satire is actually born out of a kind of like actual just ugly hatred. And when that's the case, it doesn't hit, it doesn't work. There has to be a kind of levity and a kind of grace and a kind of love and a kind of even like self-aware sort of quality that implicates the narrator or the protagonist or something like that. Otherwise, it generally speaking doesn't work. And it has to be funny. You know what I mean? It's hard to be fun. Like I think it just has to be funny. So that's yeah.
So true.
Sorry, I said I wasn't gonna call
No,
it.
as you like.
Stand up for this. So I'm a stand-up comedian, and a lot of my comic friends will send me their fiction, and I fall victim to this too, but in my writing. But often it's too punchy, where they'll try to sit in the moment, and because when we're on stage, we feel the pressure to always have punch, punch, punch. You can never really dive into an emotion because it's too funny. And I know
You're just too funny. You got the opportunity. You stood up to tell me that you're too funny.
People send me, and it's often my
Oh, okay.
criticism. It's like, fewer jokes. And the novelist, I know this is a joke similar to an Anthony Jeselnik joke. It's very witty the whole time. You had the office joke about the academics, and I'm wondering, how do you add humor to what you write without, removing the actual overall emotion from the scene? Is this a conscious thing, or is this just kind of what emerges?
It's a good question. It's probably conscious. I mean, I think it's funny. So I had it at the Brooklyn Book Festival like a couple of years ago. I had to do this like panel about humor, and the other people on the panel would like read their stuff, and everyone would crack up. And I'm like, I have no idea what anybody's laughing at. And so I don't know if I'm the right, like I just truthfully, I was just like, what's funny? Like I don't understand, And, but for me at least, I think a lot of the, I think Ralph Ellison said that humor is sort of like disguised philosophy, something like that. I'm butchering the quote, but there's something, or a disguised form of philosophical instruction. And I think that no one wants to be the silly guy. I mean, maybe some people do, but like in fiction writing, it's like, you're not like writing like a novel, you want to be like a silly guy. That's like a different kind of a thing, and it's like hard to read a novel that's just like frivolous or something like that. And so I think, for me at least, the humor kind of comes second. I think, yeah. But I also just like funny writing. I don't know. I've learned Nicholson Baker, I think, is very funny. I do think Bernhard is very funny. And those are, I think Celine is actually sometimes funny. Newt Hampton is funny. Yeah, I mean, sorry, but yeah, anyway.
I was like, Celine. It was like, wow, we're getting into the problematic portion of the conversation.
Well, he's fun. Like anyway, yeah.
I was gonna say about your writing though, Jordan, and like I think this is true. Like most really great like funny writers is that it's not about like adding humor. I think
it's all good.
like the humor is like part and parcel with the worldview. Like the part like what's so funny about this book is that the way the book sees the world is so sensitive to all the sort of hidden absurdities, right? And like the way that I think about it is like humor is like a system of intelligence, and a joke is a thing that's like funny once, right? Like a joke you can laugh at it like one time, but like when you re-encounter the joke, unless it's under radically different circumstances, it's not going to make you laugh in quite the same way. But like this book is humorous, yes, because the system of intelligence that organizes all of its observations like is sensitive to the humor that is like in the world. And I would say like advice to like writing humorous is just like, I don't know, like ask yourself, do you have a sense of humor?
That's
and like if you have a sense of humor, like what, like just like if you have a sense of humor, like put it into the book, like make the book aware of the same things that would make you sort of smile wryly, or things that you yourself find funny or amusing, right? Like let the book be capable of noticing those kinds of absurdities. And I feel like this book is a fantastic example of like a very sensitively calibrated, like humorous intelligence.
Thank you.
Yeah, put it on the blurb. Put it on the blurb.
Yeah. Extending the blurb right now.
Other questions?
Is the book gonna get me to go to the gym or like figure that out on my own?
Man, I don't know. Someone said that it did. I don't know.
Is that someone?
I will say like after,
John Baskin from the Point magazine said that it did.
after I read it, I played tennis every day for a month. So
Oh yeah, I see you. I see you. That's great. That's
we're all
great.
getting big. We're all getting small.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to talk about the Napier talks about the dizzying architecture of academia, and I was wondering if you feel like that's something special to universities. Do you feel like in general there's a lot of like dizzying spaces either on the internet or in real life?
My wife Nicolette, who's sitting in the front row, is a great writer. Taught a class at let's give it up. Let's give it up for my wife Nicolette Pola. Thanks, dude. What was even the she was teaching a class at Sarah Lawrence last semester about architecture and fiction, and like right before the novel was going to go to print, I was like, she was reading it out loud to me, like, and we were just making last minute edits. And the architecture part, she was just like, this kind of just doesn't make any sense. And I was like, damn. And she was kind of right. And so I don't remember why or what we did, but we like did a lot of work on it. But yeah, I mean, part of it is that like I said before, like my experience always of being in school was one of like dizzying, horrifying claustrophobia. It just the worst. Like I can't. I used to when I was an undergrad. I went back to undergrad as an adult. I would just get up. Like I couldn't sit there. Like I would just get up and leave the room because I'd just be like, like I couldn't. It was like but in the novel, like I tried to make the architecture sort of symbolic of like the history of universities in America, and also kind of like do the thing. I tried to do a bunch of things in there. No one here has probably read the novel yet, so I won't talk about the novel that I haven't read in too much detail. But yeah, I feel like there's an immense amount of architectural ugliness and stuff. I'm not like an architect, and I just feel it. Walking in place. This place is kind of nice. Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Thanks, guys.